Alrighty, so CitizenCon wrapped up a few weeks ago, and that was a lot of much needed and appreciated info. At this point, I'm not too concerned about speculation or worrying about the vision of this game because this past couple weeks, CIG put a lot of those thoughts to rest. I've been real busy since after CitizenCon, and I've that in that time I've had a lot of my thoughts and hype die down a little bit, so I'm on more of a tame level of how I feel about it. But I do think that CitizenCon provided the outline for a really good game and what makes me excited for the future of the game. So I'm going to be glossing over some specific details today. I'm not going to be going super in depth into each panel, just kind of talking generally here. Other than that, thank you for being here, and let's get this started. I know that this first thought isn't the smartest to have because of CIG's past, but I trust that they will make this game and make it feel like an enjoyable, fun experience. This is the first time I have ever watched something from CIG and thought, these guys actually know what they want to do now, and it actually looks good. Of course, Star Citizen 1.0 is most likely a ways away, but from what they showed us, it looks like development is ramping up more than we had thought. To start off with Genesis, it looks like an incredibly useful tool that they have shown for the development side of Star Citizen. All five phases showed some wonderful tech and advancements, but I really want to focus on the parts that involve distributing certain buildings and settlements around the verse, as well as the new biome and density tech. As we know it, Star Citizen settlements are almost all points of interest and are really distant from each other, with nothing but boring land between them. Not only does that create a stale world that offers zero exploration, but it does nothing to keep you engaged on the planet or moon surface. With Genesis, this should change pretty drastically. This will populate all spaces much quicker than before and fill them out more than we have ever seen. Genesis should allow any player to go in any direction and find something that is off the grid. These settlements and locations will range in type but make sense to each other. So no random hostile settlements next to a completely different friendly settlement. It'll be kind of like they use this example at CitizenCon, but for mining settlements, they'll be near mining deposits, caves, anything mining related. Genesis will also provide more dense and realistic environments on planets. They showcased a few new beautiful environments using this tech. The jungle, swamps, and the redwoods. These environments beam with life, but rest assured the tech will come to existing planets we already have in Stanton, and I believe in Pyro. I don't think they use that tech yet, so those planets should be overhauled, but the new ones in Nyx, Castra, and Terra, those should definitely see that Genesis tech already involved when they decide to make those planets. So I'm definitely excited for that. And generally speaking, when it comes to the first couple phases of Genesis, it was very technical. Specifically the first part with the density tech. Um, very kind of boring to watch, but it's exciting for the overall life of the universe and how it looks and feels to kind of live through it. And I think that'll really shine whenever they get this all sorted in there. And it makes a lot more sense to go on a planet and try and explore and experience it for what it actually is. The last big thing that was the last thing they showed us about Genesis was the dynamic weather. This looks absolutely incredible and is something that many people have wanted for a long time. I don't think there's much debate in that. They made it clear that this demo is not just visual, though. You have the chance of taking damage or losing control of your ship if you decide to fly through them. The text showed objects being dragged by the wind as well as your ship bobbing. These small but important changes provide a more intense and fun flying experience, in my opinion. It also creates a world that is actually alive and moving. Quite literally, the clouds were moving onto the position that we saw in the demo. Speculating a little, I assume we're going to see different types of storms. They only showcase this pretty simple and common storm for many environments. And honestly, if we only had this storm, I think many players would be okay with that. But in the future, considering they might add more types of storms, things like acid rain or toxic fog moving into different locations, sounds like a pretty exciting thing. But no matter what we saw at CitizenCon looks like a great addition to the life of the verse. Now, to move on a little bit to some of the bigger system news, we know that Nyx is our next system after Pyro is released. I would say, based off of what we saw, we won't be getting it anytime soon, but definitely much faster than we did Pyro. You can tell that Levski, the asteroid type location, looks incredible and seems to be very far along. It said it was in gray box in the video, though I assume that is more for the interior side of it, as the exterior of the whole asteroid and the surrounding area looks pretty incredible in my opinion. If I remember correctly, though, we didn't get any footage of Nick's planets, which I did think was a little weird considering um, how far along Levski was, and just the fact that they have been working on this probably for a good bit of time. I'm kind of assuming that they might want to get Genesis up and running a little bit more before they make these planets too far, so they can actually implement that tech into the planets. That is purely speculative, though, so don't trust me on that. I just assume that that's maybe what they want to do. They also surprised us with the fourth and fifth system that we'll be getting, Castra and Terra. CIG showed off some very nice pre-production footage that gets me excited for Castra and the Sherman landing zone. But for Terra, we only got concept art. Though, from the looks of it, Terra has an incredibly dynamic set of planets and environments, and I think that the Genesis tech will really shine creating these new planets. Regardless, though, I think the system news is exciting, but it doesn't really matter too much until we have good, reasonable gameplay to have in these systems. Unfortunately, what we're about to talk about next is kind of the stuff that brings it all to life a little bit. So moving on to why we are actually making this video, Star Citizen 1.0, crafting, and base building. I'm going to first start off by saying that crafting looks absolutely amazing. There are a ton of depthful factors that go into the crafting system. They're introducing tiers to every item you craft. Ships go up to tier 5, and everything else goes up to tier 3. There's going to be a purpose behind finding and looting resources and crafting materials. Gone are the days of just walking into a shop and getting the best armor and gear. You'll still be able to use these shops, of course, but don't expect them to carry the most valuable and quality gear. Everything from food tied to your armor sets all the way up to ships will be craftable, and it gives a whole new purpose behind career paths like mining and salvage. Right now, gathering professions like mining don't really have a purpose other than profit. Of course, this is completely reasonable and fine for players to do. I expect a ton of players to just mine and collect resources for profit at 1.0, though the only problem with it is, as it is now, is that that's the only thing you can do. In the future with crafting, everything you find will have a purpose, rare or common. They can be used to make something you need or want. But this type of gameplay loop doesn't stop with mining. Salvaging, hunting, farming will all be refinable and useful crafting resources. Though it goes even deeper than that with the new item stats and quality system. This now puts a quality rating on everything you can gather in the verse. So when a group of players tries to farm the big sandworm with A2 Moabs, the resources will receive will have a lower quality compared to a group trying to diligently take out the Valakar, the sandworm. This change is not only massive for players trying to find ways to create more effective and rare loot, but also makes it more difficult to exploit any of these systems without being punished. Now, of course, resources are resources, so no matter how you decide to kill it, you will get resources from killing the Valakar. One will just be worse, and one will be better. And pretty simply, the worse resource will create worse loot, and then the better resource will create higher quality, and probably more of that loot. So, in the end, I think that I like the quality system overall because it kind of puts you in a position where you are incentivized to do something the proper way without just kind of cutting the corner on it, and it plays pretty well into base building and the ability to create your own shops. I like the idea that there's going to be people around the verse that collect the best quality materials and the best resources to craft so that you can buy the highest tier armor from them, and they're kind of like your supplier for all things PvP, mining, whatever. And this is a big aspect that kind of pushes towards more progression side for Star Citizen, and not just overstocking in as many items as you can so you can sell them in mass. Each item will have a quality, and that quality will fluctuate extensively depending on how you decide to create that loot. So I'm really excited to how that'll play into base building and the ability for players to create these small shops and craft their own resources to put in their shops. And of course, there's ships like the Banu Merchantman and the Kraken Privateer that will have these, assuming that they're still going to do it, these shops on board that allow you to do this as well. So I think that's a really big aspect to crafting is allowing players to buy it off of you. And of course, this plays into base building, which is what we're going to be talking about next a little bit. So when it comes to base building, it showed off a very work in progress but functional demo. You're going to use drones to create structures. We didn't see any of these drones at CitizenCon, but they talked about it extensively, so we can assume that that's something they're going to be working on pretty soon. Almost everyone can start creating a base pretty easily. To start off, you get a vehicle like the new Cargo CSV or a simple crafting cart and put that into like a starter ship. And even though these vehicles will be a little bit more affordable, they will only be able to create smaller to medium structures. Anything bigger will need a dedicated building ship, such as the new Starlancer build or even the Pioneer. I would say the Galaxy, but there's been so much drama the past week that I don't know what to think. I know that it'll get base building at some point, but who knows when that'll be. Now, of course, with base building, you're going to need to buy a land claim. Depending on if you're in a lawful or lawless system, you might have to do this, you might not have to. And then the next step after that, I don't know if this will be a lawless or lawful system type of thing, but there will be some off limits locations for different land claims. Um, I assume that this will be pretty well talked about before we get into base building, but there will be some locations that are off limits. So that is something to keep in mind. Though again, these are literal planets, so you will have a ton of space to create whatever you need wherever you need. A big factor for base building will be the implementation of the resource network. So similar to ships, you will need to adjust power when necessary to supply different parts of your base. I assume this will be more important with the bigger bases we have seen, but only time will tell. They also discuss decorating and furnishing the inside of these bases. In order to do this, you can enter an AR mode where you can place holograms down of the objects you intend to have in there. This mode will also work for ships and hangars in the future, which will be a wonderful addition. Moving on, though, from small base building, we have the large bases. This is where this feature really starts to shine a whole lot more. When I first thought about base building, I never imagined that it would be a very large scale thing. Yes, I anticipated larger bases, but I never really thought we would have the resources to create the type of massive and extensive bases you're kind of seeing on screen right now. With vehicles like the Pioneer, you will be able to create massive structures, including a command tower that'll act as like a building AR third person mode, similar to what they did with the crafting cart demo. You can absolutely expect this to be a massive task that will be common among orgs. And you'll be able to daisy chain things like freight elevators and set up numerous hangars for your base. This only kind of starts with the possibilities, but we can delve into this more at a future date. I'm in love with the idea that your home is more of a personal hub for everything you personally own and create. You can build literal shops like I talked about before, so you can sell your valuable loot to other players. Base building provides a whole new section of gameplay, and that doesn't even begin to mention the possibilities of base raiding and space stations. My thoughts on base building are really also just excitement with a little bit of worry. Base building again gives you the player more purpose and opportunities to do what you want to do with what you have. Orgs will be able to create home bases for their members and offer player created services for players in that verse. I worry a bit how this will be performance wide and server slash shard wide. Though I know they will optimize the living hell out of this game a ton once we get to that 1.0 release. How will player bases make sense in regards to shards? If the shard you typically play on is full, will you be put into another one with all your stuff in the same place? I assume this is the most logical explanation, but what if this location that you decided to plant your base on is one of the most popular in the verse? What if someone already took that land claim you own in this shard? Will you be forced to wait into a queue until you find a shard that has that location cleared up? Or will your shard open back up and you'll just be pushed into that one once you there's enough space in those servers slash shard? It's a pretty big question for me on that side because we don't really know how big they want these servers and shards to be. Is it going to be thousands of players, hundreds, thousands? I highly doubt that number, but I assume that if they can get that server cap at a pretty high number, that we won't have to worry about this issue too much. But it does worry me with org gameplay and everything wanting to be on the same shard. How are they going to handle people logging in and out of servers? It's a pretty, it's pretty hard to think. I'm no tech guy when it comes to the back end side of what they do for server meshing, all this stuff. I know the basics of it, but regardless, with dynamic server meshing, it still sounds like a massive task for the team and raises a lot of concerns, honestly. I'm pretty confident they were going to figure something out that works well for this game, but it still worries me knowing that there's going to be people that post online, hey, this is such a great spot to put your base on, and then you're just going to have tons of people wanting to go to that exact spot. Um, maybe this is something I'm just overthinking a little bit as I typically do. But regardless, it's a little bit of a concern for me when it comes to just how this is going to play out in 1.0 with servers. But again, I'm just not going to worry about that and hope that they come up with a great solution that makes sense for everyone. So, how does this all play into Star Citizen 1.0? 1.0, as described at CitizenCon, has a thoughtful and reasonable outline that makes sense as a game. The difference between what we thought a Star Citizen release is going to be in the past versus their plan for 1.0 is actually quite significant. In past years, we knew about different gameplay additions being added to the game. This includes many types of career paths with their associated ships. This is mainly referring to the 2016 CitizenCon presentation. And even though this seemed exciting, this outline served us zero ideas as to the actual gameplay loops and progression we would have. The biggest question for a long time really has been what is actually going to keep me coming back to this game. But with the 1.0 outline, we actually know how Star Citizen as a game actually plays and acts like a game. Star Citizen still is attempting to serve all types of audiences, which typically doesn't go too well for many games. But in the 1.0 outline, everything attaches and makes sense to one another. There won't be any more gameplay loops that simply lack a purpose or meaning behind them. And a lot of these loops will be introduced through the main story of Star Citizen. And yes, you heard that correctly. Star Citizen will have a main story. Though the idea didn't make much sense when I first heard it, I really think it is a good idea so that players launch into the game knowing more about the possibilities they have. Once players finish the story, they are not only granted citizenship in the verse, they also, most importantly, have an understanding as to what they want to do in the game. CIG has given players hundreds or even thousands of different goals to be achieved in this 1.0 outline. Crafting, base building, and space stations by themselves make up many long term goals. But that doesn't even start to mention things like monster hunting, fleet battles, municipal works, and all the other content arriving with 1.0. The most important thing we have received in CitizenCon this year is that everything connects to everything in some sort of way. Whether that means your massive cargo operation messes with the Star Sim economy, or killing that massive sandworm will get you the resources to craft that ship you've always wanted, this web of activities is something unknown to current Star Citizen. Honestly, after letting the hype die down a bit, this sounds like an incredible plan that, despite being a long ways away, will be worth the wait. And considering some of the org tools and planet tech showcased will be a part of 1.0, the world will actually be alive for once in this game. They even mention how they want you to actually have to speak to NPCs for missions and contracts, which is something I have advocated for quite a while now. As we mentioned earlier, they will implement the dynamic economy, aka StarSim, that will adjust prices based off of in-game supply and demand and offer dynamic missions based off of what's going on in the verse. The economy will have money flowing in and out. As you make money, you also spend it on things like insurance and warranties as well as taxes. These might seem unfortunate, but are super needed additions that will create balance among the economy. Though some systems like Death of a Spaceman weren't directly mentioned, we know that they are still expected to be in 1.0 based off of the roadmap update on the RSI website. Now, I would absolutely recommend you go check out the RSI website and look at the new release view for Star Citizen 1.0. I will say that even though that is a decent list of features that are on there, those are mainly foundational features that are needed for 1.0. This really isn't discussing some of the greater features similar to the new EVA system. We're going to have the FPS scanning, atmospheric flight model, tons of different features that have been talked about over the past few years that are going to be implemented into the game, but they are just not significant enough to put that into the 1.0 release view. And honestly, if they did put everything that truly needed to be in the 1.0 release view, that list would be just so incredibly long. So just keep that in mind when you are looking at that. There's no need to worry if some random feature that you've been excited for years isn't on there. It will most likely be there for 1.0. For me personally, this is like escape pods. Like for some reason, I just really want those to be in the game, but I know that they're not going to put that on the 1.0 release view. That'll come at a later date in a specific patch. So just remember, there's a ton of features that are on that list. These are just the foundational features that are needed for 1.0. They also dived a little bit into PvP. It really isn't going to change too much based off of lawful and unlawful zones. Unlawful zones, it doesn't matter. You can do as much as you want, as you can be a criminal to as much of an extent as you want, and it won't matter. You can do. I mean, it'll mess up with your reputation, of course, depending on what you decide to do. But in a lawful zone, it's going to matter a lot more because you'll have to take down comm arrays and make sure that you're in an area where you're not going to get detected by the UAE or get a crime stat for that matter. If you do get detected committing some sort of crime to another player of sorts, reinforcements from the UAE will come support that player and try and take you down and make sure you're not doing what you're doing. Though this obviously can't avoid it with the comm rays, as well as tax-paying citizens will be getting planetary shields so that you won't be able to destroy those bases. I don't mean that. I don't know if that it means you can't destroy or raid those bases. I'm assuming you'll still be able to kind of infiltrate those areas and maybe hack your way in. But I'm not too sure if they are saying like you just cannot interact with those bases at all, or they just simply can't be destroyed. So that'll definitely need to be clarified a little bit. But for pirates, moving on, they're going to be able to steal ships, take them apart, and even claim ownership over them if they have a high enough reputation with that guild. I assume this is not going to be a very easy task for pirates because they obviously don't want pirates just getting ownership of a ton of different ships that they find. Regardless, though, I'm kind of excited to see how the piracy gameplay and whatnot kind of extends a little bit further. Just generally for normal PvP, like dogfighting and just bigger battles, I guess. Not necessarily fleet battles, but multiple ships versus multiple ships. I'm excited to see how this changes a little bit more. I don't think it's going to be a super massive change from what it is today, just like how it naturally acts. Of course, we'll get flight model changes over the course of until 1.0. Atmospheric flight, we're going to get Maelstrom, escape pods, engineering, which will make it where you're not just blowing up constantly. I am excited to see how PvP acts in 1.0 because I like the idea of the importance of living and making sure you get out of the situation alive rather than just blowing up and saying, okay, I'll just respawn and get another ship or whatnot. So I'm just excited to see how PvP buffs out over the next few years. I really do think that it has the opportunity to be a really fun and intense situation. I do hope that we get some more clarification though going into 1.0 over the next few years, just to see how it kind of is supposed to play out versus how it is today. Moving on from that, we do have space station gameplay, and this is probably the biggest surprise out of everything at CitizenCon. They discussed this in the past, but they really didn't. They didn't convince me that it was going to happen. Space stations aren't by themselves PvP hubs. They kind of act as a hub for organizations and generally all types of gameplay. They set up a ton of potential gameplay though for raiding space stations and stealing resources. So, space station versus space station, getting all your guys together and just going out to try and raid a station and get their resources or potentially destroy their station. I'm not sure if that's going to really be an option, but it would be interesting if it was. These stations take a ton of resources and time to fill out and create. And you're going to have a bunch of different modules you can add to these stations, including one that allows for the creation of capital class ships. So now we kind of understand how we're going to be able to create these capital class ships by ourselves. Keep in mind, though, that this process is going to take a incredibly long time. And that process starts with a pioneer. And if you don't already own a pioneer, I assume it's going to take a a long time to be able to get one and use it to create one of these space stations. And overall, like they said for I think base building, just like base building on planet side, they said that those massive bases might take up to months to create. So I would expect personally that super filled out space station with numerous different actual hubs. So the main foundational space station, as we saw at the very end with the Bengal carrier, there was like 5 of them connected to each other. I think a base like that could take upwards to like a year or more to create, which is a pretty overwhelmingly long amount of time, but it is understandable since it is the end game of Star Citizen. But back to the actual creation of these stations, you're going to need to supply outside freight elevator, so one that's kind of similar to the ones that they showed for the Knicks presentation, just gonna be one that's floating in space that you're gonna feed resources that will go to these supply drones that will create the space station basically just while you supply it. So you're not gonna actually be creating it yourself. You're just gonna be supplying the drones to do that work for you. Once you have that core base created for you, you can use this hub as the main base for anything and everything you do. The possibilities are pretty endless, and that is what excites me the most. The ability to expand these bases out with modular hardpoints on the sides will allow for a ton of different specific extensions for what you and your org participate in. If you want a ton of hangar modules, go for it. If you want to start creating your own capital ship, build the dry docking module. This is where Star Citizen's endgame rests, and it really does seem quite enjoyable. I will say one thing that worries me, but also excites me, is the amount of work needed to maintain these bases. I love the idea of having hundreds of players working together to make these bases work, but is that going to be really possible? And will shards actually hold enough players for this to function successfully? Regardless, I think CIG will figure out a game friendly solution for this. I think the most important thing to pull out of CitizenCon, though, is that there is a real game here. There's no more debate when the end of this alpha is. Now, it might take a bit to get out to us, but at least we know we are going where we are going and what to expect from it. I wouldn't expect to see 1.0 at any point in the next 2 or 3 years. I do think that the creation of Genesis and the fact that they've been developing, crafting, and base building a very large amount over the past year actually puts us a lot further ahead than we realized for the really foundational things needed for 1.0. This also is heavily affected by Genesis. I know that the Genesis presentation, despite being very cool, was almost a little underwhelming because it just wasn't very flashy or whatever. But I think that was honestly one of the biggest aspects of the CitizenCon, at least day one, was the fact that this tool was going to be in the hands of developers sooner than later. And even though we might not see the effects of Genesis soon for like on player side, we know that that tool is going to help developers a ton create these planets and environments that are very, very dense and filled out so that we actually have something to explore and find gameplay on these planets. So, though I again, like I said, I wouldn't expect to see this at all in the next few years. It might be a little bit sooner than some people are saying. Like a lot of people are saying like 2030. And as much as I want to believe that just based off of CIG's past, I really think it will be sooner than that. And I do think that we're going to get a lot more updates about 1.0 than we did over the past 8 years. Um, no, I don't think they're going to be talking about it every month. I don't think they're going to be updating us about every specific detail coming to 1.0. But I think once we get past this 4.0 roadblock, we're going to be like kind of on the very, very long but needed home stretch towards 1.0. So we should see systems that we were missing from last year's CitizenCon come in shortly after 1 point or 4.0. And then after that, we might see things like Starware, monster hunting, everything, base building, crafting, that should be coming in 2025. Again, I don't want to assume that or expect that, but I do have a lot more faith that they know where they're going with each and every update that they push towards 1.0. So that does give me a lot of faith. And when you look at space stations, you look at base building, crafting, I think now that I'm kind of taking a step back, it's been a few weeks since CitizenCon. It's really easy to tell how these three systems specifically are going to really add a ton more depth to each aspect of the verse. And then once they're able to connect everything in the web that they showed with the 1.0 outline, I really do think that we have a solid game on our hands that sounds like a ton of fun. And I really can't wait to play. It's honestly hard to play the Star Citizen we have now because the outline for what it's supposed to be seems so good that I just kind of want to wait until it's ready to play it. So, I mean, that doesn't mean I'm going to stop playing it, but I certainly I'm just excited for what is to come in the future. Regardless, so thank you for watching this video. I really this is kind of a I've been extremely busy since the last time I posted, and even then, it's been pretty hectic trying to get videos out and just keep up to date with everything going on, and hopefully make a video about it. But overall, I'm super thrilled with the CitizenCon presentation, and I would love to go more into depth with some of these specific details that we got from CitizenCon. Um, but again, thank you for being here. I know this is an incredibly long video, and I know there wasn't a ton of depth to each thing I talked about, but all of views, everything that you guys have said in the comments, everything I appreciate it very much. The support overall has been pretty incredible over the past few months, and I'm really excited to talk a little bit more about what's going on with Star Citizen 1.0 and all the updates leading up to it. I know there's a lot of 4.0 drama right now, but I'll get to that whenever. Um, Besides that, thank you so much for watching. I have a playlist of all Star Citizen videos on this channel. If you'd like to check that out, go for it. Feel free to subscribe, like, dislike, whatever you'd like to do. Um, Outside of that, have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video.